Today we're going to talk about cognitive development for middle childhood, which is roughly ages 6 to 11 all the way up to 11, 12 years old. Some of the things we'll be going over are Jean Piaget. He's our stage theorist. We're going to be going over his concrete operational stage. That's the stage that they're reaching at this age. We'll go over a little bit more about brain development and things that are happening in the brains that are allowing them to make these big jumps in cognition and how they learn. We'll also go over a man named Howard Gardner and some ideas that he had about multiple intelligences. And then we'll also talk about language, literacy, and school development as well, because this is the age that children typically enter into kind of more formal elementary school education. As I mentioned last week when we were talking about physical development, this is often called the forgotten years. We spend a lot of research and time thinking about ages 0 to 5. We know that a tremendous amount of brain development happens then. We also know that we can try to kind of bridge some gaps with the socioeconomic status in children by getting them into preschool or early education, things like that. We also spend a lot of time looking and researching at adolescents because they're typically engaging in some risky behaviors, either, the cliche of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or, other risky behaviors that they can engage in as well. And because they are adolescents and they are older than this forgotten years, it can have long-term consequences of engaging in behaviors at 16 can have long-term consequences for the rest of your life. So we do spend a lot of time kind of doing those bookend ages, whereas this middle age, preschool, and then more so the middle childhood are not that much thought about or researched. But the interesting thing is they are making huge jumps in cognition and the ability to think logically. So Jean Piaget is our stage theorist. He's the Swiss gentleman who was writing up until his death in the 1980s, but we started off with some of his earlier stages, like for infants, it's sensory motor. Now for middle childhood, it's concrete operational. And the biggest thing is that they're now having the ability to think logically, and they have more adult-like thought processes and how they can think step by step by step. So some of the things that we know that they can do is they can categorize. So they can line things up by size, by shape, by color. That's serration. So smallest to largest, largest to smallest, darkest to lightest, that type of thing. They also have transitive inference, and this is comparing objects. So if I was to give you 3 or 4 sticks without measuring them or getting a measuring tape or looking at them, you would be able to look at them and see roughly which one is longest. And then class inclusion as well, a whole and its parts. So the best description or example for this is a bouquet. So a bouquet is made out of roses, daisies, and greenery. And then you can look at and you can see, there's this many roses, there's this many daisies, there's this many greenery. As a whole, those 3 parts make the whole bouquet. And that's class inclusion. So this is something that previous to this, children really couldn't engage in. They would have to measure something if they wanted to see which one was longest or shortest, or the conservation of liquid, 2 equal cups with equal amounts of liquid, pour one in a bigger or taller glass, and they think that one has more. At this age, they should be able to know that. They know that if you change the liquid cup that it's in, it doesn't change how much liquid has actually been in it. So at this point, they understand that logically as well. They also have the ability to engage in some kind of reasoning. So we have inductive and deductive thinking. So children are no longer really egocentric at this age. They understand that people have their own perspectives and viewpoints. A couple weeks ago in early childhood, I talked about perspectives with like the mountains, that a child sitting across you doesn't understand that you have a different perspective of what mountains might look like if you were sitting in front of a diorama. At this age, they do. So they are really coming out of their egotistical or egocentric stage, and they now have the ability to understand that others have their own perspective and viewpoint. And that also allows us to make this big jump in reasoning. So they can engage in inductive reasoning. It's logical thinking. It's based on observations, what you see, hear, smell, taste about the environment around you. And you can make generalizations or conclusions about groups, objects, ideas, things like that, that you can see, touch, feel, that you can interact with and learn about and read about. Piaget really didn't think that they could engage in deductive reasoning. That's because it involves a lot more abstract and hypothetical thinking. You need to take the concepts and generalizations that you learned in inductive. So first you start with this, you're making generalizations, conclusions, observations, and then you take that information and you become more abstract with it. And you can make a jump in logic, or you can be more flexible in the types of things that you're learning. So we really think that at this age, in middle childhood, ages 7 to 11, children really can only engage in inductive reasoning and not deductive reasoning. So all of the jumps that they are making are allowing them to be more logical in their thought process. They're thinking more like us. They don't have that kind of magical thinking that preschoolers have, where they, think all kinds of ridiculous things, or they think their dreams are real. At this age, they're really coming out of that, and they're thinking more logically and more like an adult will, but they cannot think abstractly or hypothetically yet. I do want to talk about Gardner's multiple intelligences. This is a really big kind of change in our field. Child development is not really a field that's constantly changing. We are learning more about brain development, and we're trying to bring that into what we learn and how we teach. But it's not really something that, like, every 5 years, like biology or chemistry, there's a new discovery or explosion in what we're learning about things. There's no Big Bang or black hole or anything like that. We're still working off of the things that we've been learning for the last 150 years. Howard Gardner, though, is a newer kind of theorist. He kind of did this in the late 90s. That's when I first learned about it, when I started teaching preschool, and it's a fantastic idea. And I think it's really important. Cognitive learning is kind of learning and brain learning, but we also know that it has different capacities or areas that you can have strengths in. So what he kind of did is he broke the types of intelligences that you have into different types. So you have musical, so if you can play an instrument, you can sing, you can carry a tune, you learn best by singing or learning or something like that. Kinesthetic, being able to run, bike, move your body. You probably are the type of person that needs to be doing something. You learn best when you can actually manipulate it with your hands, or jump or run while you're doing it. Interpersonal, so that's how you deal with other people. Are you a people person? Do you like hanging out with people? Do you like talking to them? Linguistic, that's your ability to talk and to communicate with others. Logical, that's more of like the typical, when we think of intelligences and cognitive development, that's typically what we thought of before this. So it's like adding, subtracting, reading, that type of thing. Then we have visual spatial. So if you like to geometry versus algebra, if you like reading and writing, or while somebody's lecturing, you're doodling, or if you're in a group project, you always want to make the slides of the PowerPoint and you spend a lot of time tweaking them and making them look nice. Those might be that might be a key for you, that you're a visual spatial learner. Intrapersonal. That's kind of knowing yourself, self-awareness, where you are in the world. And then you have existential, probably a more spiritual, religious person who's kind of linked into this greater whole, centering yourself within kind of the cosmos, and that type of thing. You're a little bit more concerned with what's going on above you. And then naturalistic, so people that are keyed in with outside. They want to be outside, they want to be hiking, they want to be with nature, not maybe in an urban environment, someone who enjoys being in a rural environment, doing chores outside, that type of stuff. So if you ever search this, I always say the best place to start is with Google Images, because you can see a lot of different pictures about this. Cartoons that people have made, or ways that people have done it. And then there's tests that you can take. So, there's all kinds of personality tests, and there's Gardner's multiple intelligence, and that will kind of tell you how you learn. I know that I am definitely a visual spatial, and I'm an interpersonal as well. I'm definitely a people person. That's why I like teaching. I like meeting students and talking with people. And I'm definitely visual spatial as well. I do have strengths in logical and linguistic as well, but I do like to learn the best in a classroom environment with other people. I usually like group projects because I like hanging out with people. And then visual and spatial, it's best if I can see it. And that's why I always have a lot of pictures, because in my lectures is because that's how I learn best. But we do try to kind of, especially in lectures where we are more one-on-one, we try to hit a lot of these areas as teaching. And that's kind of the way that education as a whole is going, is that we are trying to meet the needs of all learners. So not just somebody who's logical or linguistic, who just talks or learns by hearing, something like that. We want to meet the needs of everybody. So off in the right-hand area, I have put a bunch of stuff about kinesthetic learners. So that's the people that need to move their body, they need to feel it, they need to touch it, they need to do it in order to learn best. So if I was working in elementary school and I had a lot of kinesthetic learners in my classroom who needed to be active and moving, how could I support their learning in a classroom environment for people that need to move? I can make pipe cleaner letters. So, you know, pipe cleaners, shape them into different shapes, form letters out of bread dough. That's very big in Montessori and Waldorf education, especially Waldorf. You're doing a lot of cooking projects and making bread and kneading bread and stuff like that. So you could form letters out of bread dough, make some breadsticks in different kinds of shapes for letters, and then eat them afterwards. Same with baking and eating cookies, making them into shapes or letters or numbers or anything like that. Using your whole arm to write letters outside. Sometimes you'll see this, they'll be like D, or you can even do with those ribbon gymnastic twirl things that people have. You change where you write. So in a lot of more progressive classrooms, you'll see that they're on like little balls, like those exercise balls that they can jump on for people that need to be moving while they're learning, or those gaming kind of C-shaped ones where you're laying down and you can kind of move back and forth and stuff like that. Stools, sitting on the ground, going outside, writing on a typewriter, a computer, a blackboard, an iPad, large pieces of paper, construction paper, taking a walk, reading the words that you find during a walk. When I used to live in Brooklyn, I taught in an after-school program, and we would do this on the way back from school. It was a super urban environment. Working with kindergartners and first graders who are just emerging in their reading skills. So we would always be reading like barbershop or different kinds of storefront, open, closed, things like that. A lot of times people like this need to be moving. They need to be fidgeting with their hands or their bodies, something like that. So a cush ball or a sensory ball or a worry stone, something like that while you're studying or while you're working will allow your body to be moving while you're actually kind of working on your brain. The fidget spinners that have become very popular, I had one and my daughters took it off my desk. But you know, they're the fidget spinners, put them on your finger, you can spin them around. The funny thing about that is that that's not so great for kinesthetic learners or maybe people who have ADHD who need to be moving, is because the fidget spinner is doing the movement and you're not. So if you need to be moving your body, you want to be doing the action. So like there's a lot of like fidgety things that you can click repetitively, or you can turn over a cush ball in your hand, or you can squeeze a worry stone or a worry ball. That would be better for you if you are a kinesthetic learner or you are if you maybe have some ADHD. You should be doing the repetitive movement and not the fidget spinner. So those actually really aren't that great for this type of stuff, and they're quite annoying. Especially as a teacher, seeing them in the classroom, it's not one of the things that I love to see. Brain density. So we're going to talk a lot about brain development now. So we're making those huge jumps. So children can learn in all of these different areas, and they're now able to think logically. That happens because of brain development. So we know that brain density actually declines in this area. So you wouldn't think that. You can think logically where your brain must be getting bigger and denser, more weighty. It's not actually. At this point, you're already kind of using certain connections a lot, and the connections that you're not using get pruned, like you're pruning a rose, you're cutting it. You cut and sever those connections, and they're kind of gone. So the types of things that you're not doing, those connections get lost. But the interesting thing is that the white matter, so that's kind of nerve fibers and connections that are sending information between neurons, that increases. Specifically right here up in your frontal lobes. And what this kind of does, and what's really fascinating, is that's the start of executive functioning. So this is your ability to consciously control your thoughts, behaviors, emotions, and actions to accomplish a goal. So I'm going to give you an example. For you who are not from California, we have to do mission projects where we learn about California missions, which were started by the Spanish hundreds of years ago. And typically in 4th, 5th, or 6th grade, you learn about missions and you have this really big project. So for many of you who grew up in California, you remember doing one. This is a great example of executive functioning being able to happen at this age. So what are the steps that you need to do in order to be successful with your mission? It typically happens over months and months and months. So you receive the assignment. with your class, you learn about missions. You probably go on a field trip, you visit a local mission. Then when you get home, you're going to have to figure out what tasks need to be done. You can't do all of it in one night. A lot of people try. They have less executive functioning, but ideally to get an A, that's your goal, is to do well in this, to pass 5th grade, to be able to go to middle school. You need to break down the assignment into the tasks that need to be done. You need to figure out how to handle the assignment. You need to get organized. You need to break down your plan into a series of steps. Over 6 weeks, this is what I'm going to do. You need to figure out how much time is needed to carry out your plan and set aside that time. You might need to ask your parents to buy materials or take you to the library in order to learn more, or maybe go back to the mission and look around more. You need to make adjustments as needed. If you're sick 1 week, you've lost time on it, then you need to maybe skip baseball practice or soccer practice in order to stay at home and work more on your mission project. You need to finish the task in the time allotted and get the project to school with your parents. You need to find a van. You're probably not going to be able to take your mission project on the bus or walk. So that's really something quite large that we ask children to do, and they can do that because the white matter, so the nerve fibers, are growing and they're increasing, and the frontal lobes, which handles a lot of that logic and that ability to think more adult-like. A lot of people are going to be getting executive function. Some people never will. Some people, for whatever reason, because of a disability or because of significant drug use, or just cognitively, they never get that way. Their brain, for whatever reason, does not have this white matter growing. They won't ever have executive functioning. Most of us will be able to, and it's one of those things with the brain is you use it or you lose it. So you're always wanting to learn, even in your 60s and 70s and 80s, you're wanting to learn and grow and keep your brain fresh and growing and not pruned, not taking those connections out. So we always want to be working on our executive functioning. You are using executive functioning right now. I've given you a lot of assignments. You have to go observe children. You have to write a research paper. I am not sitting with you, especially in an online learning. I'm not constantly sitting there holding your hand, working you through it. While I am very available to meet up with you or by email, a lot of this is very independent. You have to break down, what do you need to do to write a 5 or 6 page paper about something about child development? So you are using executive functioning right now. If we were in the classroom environment, I would actually do this with you. If you link to this, it will take you to a funny little quiz about, are you smarter than a 5th grader? I think the best grade that any of my classes have ever got is about 75%. So we've never actually become smarter than 5th grade. That's why they have a whole show about it, is because we've lost a lot of the information that we retained a long time ago. So they're picking up a lot of facts, they're memorizing a lot of things, they're making a lot of observations, whereas we might have gone beyond them in our executive functioning and our abstract thinking ability, but we've probably lost a lot of memorization and things like that. Like if I was to be like, what's the capital of South Dakota? Most of you, unless you're from South Dakota, do not remember what that is, whereas a 5th grader probably does. What can children do when they're communicating at this age? The fantastic thing is they understand most of our verbal communication. You can give them a lot of complex set of instructions. You can give them 3 things. Go upstairs, get your shoes, get your socks, meet me by the front door. You wouldn't ask a 3-year-old to do that. They would go upstairs and they would never come down because they found a book to read or a dinosaur to play with. This age, they understand it. They should comply with it, but that's more of a social and emotional thing. And they can make themselves understood by others. You should be able to understand all the words that they're saying. They can put together a lot of different words, stringing together paragraphs worth of words. They're sophisticated. They use communication, context, pragmatics, the social ability to use speech, nonverbal communication. They shouldn't be getting super, super close to you like this and talking straight into your face. They understand how you use the social aspects and the nonverbal aspects of communication and how you use it verbally in order to make yourself known. At this age, we're also engaging in a lot of literacy, reading and writing. 6 and 7 is about the age when most children are reading. And the best thing that you can do, myself having kindergartners right now, is they don't have any homework except they do 20 minutes of reading with an adult every day. So sometimes they read to me, sometimes I read to them, sometimes we read a short book together and then they tell me what happens. They have to recall what they heard in the book. Sometimes we tell each other fairy tales, sometimes we read the newspaper, sometimes we read kid magazines that they get. Sometimes we read cookbooks, like if they wanted to make an Easter cake, so we read through the cookbook, we talked about things that we need to get, we made a list, they wrote out all the food coloring. cupcake liners, you know, stuff like that. So it doesn't have to be super static. It doesn't have to be like boring, like, oh God, we're reading, you know, the pigeon wants to drive the bus for the 900th time. You can do a lot of different literacy things in order to get that 20 minutes, but the act of an adult and a child reading together really reinforces that brain development. Those connections are made, they're not pruned, they're not taken away, they're reinforced, they're connected so that children can learn more from reading. You can also have children choose their own reading materials, and I think this is fantastic as well. And this was one of the best advice, pieces of advice I ever got as a mom, was I might think that their books are really stupid, but they don't, and if it gets them reading, then that's the most important thing. So one of my daughters is super into comic books, and the other one reads these like ghost, dead kid, in junior high. I don't even understand. I find them really boring. Like, I'm literally reading them and I'm actively trying not to retain any of the information. I don't want to use my brain space learning about these books that she really likes. But she loves them and she's reading, and that's the most important thing to me. But I also have some ideas about writing grocery lists, menus, weekend schedules, writing a letter to Santa or grandma if they live far away, drawing pictures. The adult writes the story out if they're not quite literate yet. You know, this is Santa Claus, this is blah, 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 blah. The child writes a story with the beginning, middle, and end. That's something that they're working on typically in about first grade. And then using multiple intelligences to integrate literacy in how they learn. So if your child is a naturalistic learner, going outside and having nature walks and bringing a journal, drawing pictures of leaves and then writing about the leaves and the observations that you have about leaves. If you're a people person, going out to eat with your family and having your child read the menu or read it to their grandmother or something like that. So you can take the way that your child learns best and you can integrate literacy into it. If these seem new to you, you haven't heard these ideas and you really like the idea, then it is definitely something that it's definitely something that I encourage everybody to look up online. If you Google the multiple intelligences, or you Google kinesthetic learner or spatial learner and then literacy or mathematics or science or something like that, you will have a lot of really awesome ideas come up. So with the great thing about education is it's very democratic. We've shared it online so that everybody can have a lot of this information in order to help their own development, children's development, or children that you're working with in the classroom. There we go. So children are now entering elementary school, and I do want to kind of talk about this. If you go farther in education, you will have whole classes devoted to these subjects, but I do kind of like to bring up the idea that education is really different depending on where you live. So right now we have Common Core standards. 48 states have said that they want to do these federal standards. So it's something that the Department of Education came up with. They were really concerned that children in the United States were being prepared for tests, but not for like employment or education or higher level thinking. They only knew how to kind of get to these test scores. And they're like, this is no good. This is not how we want children to be engaged learners that can go on and bring these skills into employment and be a good workforce, or we want them to go into higher education and learn and become part of the workforce as well. So we knew that we weren't really teaching children appropriately. What can we do? So we've kind of come up with Common Core standards. It got a little bit rushed at the end, but this is a work in progress towards that goal of getting away from the tests. We will always test. We need to know where children are. We need to assess where they are at certain ages, but not focusing on teaching towards the test, but teaching towards eventual employment or education. How you get that, though, is very different. So Alaska and Texas do not do Common Core standards. That is their state right. They have not chosen. They probably do not get some federal money by doing that, but they have their own standards statewide that they follow. So California as well has other state standards that are in addition to the Common Core standards that we have as well. We also know that educational choice has become a hot button issue as well. There's charter schools, magnet schools, homeschooling. There's a lot of different choices out there for parents. And I think the thing that I always tell parents is to make the most educated choice that's best for you and your family. I go to a local public school. I adore it. I volunteer there weekly. But for some people, for some children, charter schools, magnet schools, homeschooling might be the best, or their own public school might be the best choice for their child. if your child does have special needs, ADHD, autism, things like that, you are going to need to do more research and education to find the best fit for your child. In public schools, it's fantastic. We have federal acts that we must follow that allow for the education of children, especially children with special needs. If you go to a charter school, magnet school, or a private school, those choices might be limited. You have more due process and you have more IEPs at a public school or a magnet school, and sometimes a charter school or private school, but charter schools and private schools do not have to provide for that. So there is that kind of issue. That's why I tell people you have to research. You shouldn't just like that they have a fancy brochure or they're in your neighborhood. You need to pick the schooling choice that is best for your child and your family and that allows them to learn in the best possible way. If we were in a more advanced level class, we could have more discussion about educational choice and common core standards, because this is a really contentious and controversial issue. People have different sides, and I do like to encourage healthy debate. But in a 100 class, I do just like to tell people that there are different types of schooling. There are federal standards and state standards that we must follow. And then recently, we've seen technology become more present in classrooms as well. So my children have Chromebooks or iPads in their classrooms. They use them on a limited basis. The days of kind of having a computer lab are going away. I observed a classroom in Vista Unified where the third graders were building websites. So they were learning how to build websites, and it was supporting their education in that they were doing them about volcanoes or hamsters or whatever their interest was. They were building a website around it and then researching in order to upload it onto this, simple protected website that they had within the school district. So we know that it's more present in classrooms, and this is kind of a controversial issue as well. What is the impact of screen time on children? We're not really sure. We know they watch quite a lot. Can technology aid in the classroom? Is it hindering our development as a whole? I don't really have the questions for that, the answers for those questions. It's something that we're researching a lot more. But we are in school. So at this age, maybe you're being homeschooled, but you're in some kind of formal education or some kind of formal group schooling. The best thing to do, and the way that you can help a child in your life, a niece, a nephew, a cousin, a child of your own, or you want to be an educator, is that you have adults, and children need adults who help them learn schoolwork and the characteristics to use in study time. So it's more the characteristics. So, instead of praising people for being for being intelligent, we should praise them and encourage time management. Regulating your emotions, seeking help when you need it, persisting even if you get a bad grade. 1F, you're going to never do it again. Well, you're going to fail the entire class. So we want to work on those characteristics that are going to see you through your entire lifetime into employment that can really support you in being a well-rounded individual. You're working hard, you're trying, you're persisting, you get help when you need it, all those types of things. Does everybody do that all the time, even as an adult? I know that I don't, that I'm always searching for balance and being able to be the best learner or employee or teacher that I can. But I know that my parents as a child really helped me in this, and they helped me study, and they helped me learn how to study so that I could be more successful in school. You should have a place to study. This could be a kitchen table, a dining room table, a lap thing on the couch, anything like that. But you have somewhere where you can study that's quieter. Maybe the TV is off, soft music is playing, or you're in a bedroom, that type of things. Ample books and supplies. And I don't mean that, in September and August you go to Target or IKEA or Walmart and you buy all the supplies. It can be literally as simple as getting, those stacks of white paper that you can get at Staples for your printer. So like printer paper for like $3, and then 99 cents worth of those orange pencils, and just sharpening them. But children need to kind of write, and they need to work at it, and they need to be able to hold pencils in their fingers, and they need to practice writing and reading as much as possible. So you need to have some kind of supplies for them. Whiteboards and white markers would be a lot more ecologically and maybe a little bit cheaper, but anything like that where children can physically practice the skills of literacy is going to be really important. Limiting TV as well. are still kind of working with how much screen time is good for people. And if you're interested in this, Harvard has a great center called the Center for Media Studies, and they have kind of more specific guidelines. It's something that pediatricians and researchers haven't come to a common consensus, but we do kind of feel that we want children to play after school, unstructured play or sport play, get that physical education, that movement going, blow off some steam after a long day spent in the classroom, have some downtime, do your homework so you're not scrambling the next morning at 6 a.m., play with your family, eat with your family, and then maybe have some TV time afterwards. But we are noticing that children have a lot of screen time, even when they're in school. 4 or 5 hours of screen time in addition to schooling doesn't allow for active play, downtime, or homework time, and those are the things that we really want to focus on. I think one of the other good pieces of advice that I've received for this age that my children are just entering is asking specific questions about the school day or social aspects of school. So, I mean, I always start out with like, hey, how was your day, honey? And then I'll be like, oh, how did you play with Kylie today? Or did you guys play checkers in the classroom? Or is so-and-so still fighting about blah, blah, blah at recess? You know, something like that. Socially, make sure that they're doing okay. They're making friends. They know how to play tag. They're not bullying or being bullied. And then questions about their school day, academics, what kind of things are they working on? And the more specific the questions, the more specific the answers. Because if you just ask, how was your day? And they say, fine, and it never goes beyond that, then you might not get the nuances or the detail of the things that are going on in their classroom. Socioeconomic status can contribute to environments that are less cognitively stimulating. So if the TV is always on, there's not a place to study, there's not paper to write on, that can make the issues of cognitive development kind of lessen. So you're not being cognitively stimulated, or if you don't have camp or enrichment activities to go beyond what you're learning in school, you can do a little bit worse in your testing that you will engage in school. So we do want to make sure that children from all socioeconomic statuses have the same advantages so that they can go to camp, or they can learn how to swim, or they have paper in their classroom, or they have an iPad or a computer to write on. So there's a lot of social services that are built around this, either from volunteers who are teaching people how to swim, or from grants and federal programs and state programs as well as like that. So if you're finding that a child in your life needs extra support, there are lots of interventions. Googling or going to your local social services, health and human services, parks and recreation department, just asking and seeing what's out there is going to be the best way that you can kind of help children with that. So in conclusion, we know that cognition really changes. Children are thinking more logically, more adult-like. They cannot think abstractly yet, but they can think more, and they're having their brain develop so that they can think through a lot of more complex projects like a mission project. This is really important because they're in elementary school. We're expecting more of them. They should be retaining a lot of information, learning a lot of facts and numbers and figures so that they can start to use that later on. They do still need support from their parents because they need support in getting those good character traits, hardworking, asking for help, persisting even after a failure. So those good character traits and the increase in brain development and the increase in logical thinking leads to a lot of cognitive jumps. So those types of things really help us be able to integrate all the different ways that we learn so that we can kind of leave our middle childhood age having thought a lot, having developed our brain in order to kind of lead us into adolescence and then adulthood after that. That is the lecture for this week. Thank you so much.